Hello, everyone. And today on our podcast, we are going to be talking about something which we feel is quite new and we're hoping will be very beneficial for you in some shape or form. And so, without any more ado, we're going to dive into the idea of sound and music therapy. Right, Patricia?
Right. And, this is such a new thing, or at least it's new to me. I don't know. Maybe a lot of other people do this. But what was interesting is that my niece had just told me that she had done this. And she had done the sound therapy. And she said, Auntie, it was amazing. It was like the vibrations were inside of you. And then you mentioned it like literally days later, saying, Hey, let's look at music therapy. So this is really interesting as I've been researching. So there's music therapy. This is what I heard or found music therapy and sound therapy,
Yeah,
similar yet slightly
different.
different,
Yeah.
all within the same vein, but they're similar, but they are slightly different.
Yeah. And I think what's interesting is with both different, well, with both types of therapies, I think it's what we're suggesting here and giving you thoughts and ideas about is this could just be another tool in helping manage the stress, maybe anxiety, overload of our days, which I think quite a lot of us have. And it's finding ways to help us deal with that. And I think that's why we really wanted to talk about this is it's not complicated. It can be free, right? And if it's something that interests you, obviously you can take it further. But we do know that a lot of science now is showing that music and sound therapy is extremely beneficial in helping to reduce our blood pressure, in helping to reduce our anxiety levels. So it's really helping us take our nervous system, which is often in that state of stress, and bringing it into that state of rest, which I think we could all use a little bit more of.
I think so many people could use this. And as I was looking into it, I noticed that like things like sleeping,
Yes.
helping you to relax. There were so many different ways that it can help. For music therapy, which again, slightly different. Um, but music therapy, I also found can help with all sorts of stuff. And that is done, well, let me backtrack. Music is the universal language, right? Doesn't matter who you are, we all relate to music and we all react to music in a slightly different way. And so we can use the music for whatever it is that we need. But I found, which is fascinating, is that music therapy can also help with dementia, traumatic brain injuries, mood disorders, autism, pain, behavioral, emotions, like all sorts of stuff. And I thought that was really, really fascinating. With sound therapy, it sounds like what you were talking about. It seems to me is more relaxing, but you can really relate music to all sorts of different things because I guess, it takes you to a different place, right? A place where you mentioned dementia before this when we were talking.
This is it. I mean, you see it a lot, in care homes and things like that, where if somebody was a musician, right, in their younger days, and you see them, you see videos on YouTube, on Instagram of people that are barely verbal anymore, who have, very advanced dementia, and you take them and you put them in front of a piano if they were piano players, and they put their hands on the piano, and all of a sudden they just start playing away, right?
Oh,
Um,
fascinating.
this is it because it's really dialing back into their nervous system into a memory that, is associated with pleasant sensations and emotions. And, in a lot of these situations, they actually use music therapy in that way because it helps all these people with advanced dementia to reduce their stress levels, right? It's a very stressful situation for somebody to be in 24/7. And you see, it's truly amazing. So if you think that's what music can do for somebody who is no longer really aware of what's going around them, I think that really dials it home as to like how important music is for us in not just a social way, but on an in an individual basis,
Yeah.
right? I don't
And,
think
and
you
let's face it, like music, I don't know of a single person who doesn't like music. Now we're maybe going to like all sorts of
different
different
types.
music. But so this is okay. This is kind of going, stage left here. But we identify music, like you said, they all bring back memories. And I was watching this documentary a couple weeks ago on Jaws. Now, I don't know if everybody in our audience has watched Jaws, but they were talking about the music and they were talking about, all the different things that they had done for Jaws, but they said the most important piece was the music because we all identify to the music and you can create like you can increase that suspense or decrease depending on the music. So, at least for people with our generation, if you hear dun 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 dun. Like we all know where that's going, right? Like that's not a good place.
I love this. It's not a good place.
So music is just so identifiable, right?
Yeah.
We can really take it. And I know there's music therapy, but we can do this on our own as well, right? We can
So
find music that wherever you're at that moment that works for you, you can find music and deal with it that way.
I honestly, I've used it so unconsciously. I was saying to you just before we were recording, it's like for me, very much I will look to music to either, reflect how I'm feeling. So if I want to feel calmer, like in the evening now, just the other day, I created a chill vibe music list for cooking because sometimes at the end of the day, I had some music that was a little bit too peppy while I was cooking. I'm like, I'm tired. I want something to be with me, but I don't need it to try and pump me up, right? So
Yeah.
I have literally created different playlists to reflect sort of how I'm feeling. And then sometimes I will literally just search out one or two songs. I just want to hear them. I just want to hear these songs, right?
Yeah.
Um,
So I think, we can do this on our own, but if we're going to get a little bit more specific on the different types of therapies. So music therapy, you can go one of two ways, and you go with a therapist if you're going to do, go to that next level, where it can be active music therapy, and that's where you are singing, you're creating music, you're playing something, etc., and you would do that with your therapist. Or you can be receptive, which means that maybe you're listening to music that you really identify with, and then you speak about it afterwards. So that is more the music therapy. And what the sound therapy is more about the tones and the vibrations and the frequencies. And
mm,
they do that a lot with the crystal bowls or the metal bowls and gongs and things like that. And like I told you earlier, so earlier today I did a sound meditation, which I've never done before. And it was really, really interesting. And it was just online.
mhm.
I think if I'd been there, it would have been a deeper experience
I
because
think, yeah.
I couldn't really get into the vibrations.
Mm.
It was 20 minutes and it was a woman and she was doing the crystal bowls. So she had a whole bunch of crystal bowls and it was really interesting how she was able to do that. Although I was supposed to have my eyes closed, but I watched just a little bit because I wanted to see it. And at the beginning, my brain was kind of going, getting my grocery list done and all that sort of stuff. Um, and my heartbeat, was fine, but I could feel by the end of it, I was calmer. I had relaxed in my body, and I felt really good. It was a really interesting experience. And I can imagine being right there, would be so much more intense.
I think well, I did one years ago and it was, I had no idea what to expect. They just told us to bring a pillow and a blanket because you're not moving, you're just lying flat. And sort of to what you were saying, you physically feel the vibrations in your body. Like you feel the vibrations in your chest. It kind of almost, and the sounds, I don't know, it was probably the same when you did it, but the sound almost lingers like they overlap.
Yeah.
Tonalities overlap. And it kind of really gives you a sensation of almost floating at times. I
Yes.
don't, yeah. And it
Yeah.
was,
Yeah. I can see that. That's
yeah.
what happened this morning.
And then, as you said, it was such an amazing experience. And you do feel very, very relaxed afterwards, 100%.
Yes. Yeah.
So I think, yeah, for people that are interested, I mean, there are so many options out there now, right? This is it. We have these sound bath options. We have music therapy. You can do it online with YouTube, to your point, which is what you did this morning, right?
Yeah.
Um,
And
but
it's just another tool in your toolbox, right?
yeah,
Today's a really stressful world.
yes.
Lots going on. We're busy, and having another tool in your toolbox to help you relax. Anxiety is such a big thing in today's world. And it bothers me that there's so much anxiety in this world and stress in this world. And so having something that can calm you down and relax you and maybe get you focused back on you and what you need and fill yourself up so that you have the capacity and the energy to do what it is that you need to do. And maybe sometimes we need to let certain things go. And having this experience well, I'm thinking more sound therapy, but just playing music that kind of takes you away.
And that's what it does, right? You hit the nail on the head. It really does. It can, it can take you away. You think of just like you said, a movie you watched. Music literally can transport you. And I think, like you said, we really do need that now. And this is something that I think is accessible to, especially with with YouTube and things like that. It's so accessible to us now.
It really is. I think you said earlier, so this is fairly new, or at least, I mean, I think sound therapy anyways is quite ancient. Lots of
Oh
old
yeah.
cultures used to use all of this stuff, but generally speaking, to use it as a therapy or use it as a tool in our toolbox, not just, hey, let's bop around because the music's good, but to actually use it
Use it as
as
some.
a tool is relatively new, I would think.
It
But
is.
it's growing, isn't it? I
Oh,
think you know
definitely.
more about that than I do.
Yeah, I was listening to a podcast the other day, and it's with a professor in neurobiology, and she's looking very much into so she's literally researching it from um, a nervous system point of view, how it impacts us um, on a scientific level. So really reflecting, the science is reflecting what you and I have been talking about, right? They're seeing inflammation markers go down for people who regularly use music to relax. Like you're saying, for people that play it, it relaxes their cortisol, their stress levels. So I think it's she was equating um, music therapy to where exercise and nutrition was 10, 15 years ago. We didn't realize 10, 15 years ago that eating well and moving was good for us, on a scientific level, which it's old wives' tales, whatever it was. And she's suggesting that, we will be at that place in about 10 or 15 years' time. And I will actually drop the name of her book in it for anybody who's interested, because there it takes it even further. It's not just about music, but it's about the arts in general and how really they should be accessible to everybody. But that could just be a whole other podcast. So I'll
It
refrain
could
there.
be. It could be.
But it's really, I think essentially, we've talked about it in a very general way, but if you are looking for more scientific information, it is actually catching up now and showing on a biological level how music can impact us in just such a positive way. So, like we said, it's just really, we wanted to share it because we just think it's a really important tool and it's a fun one.
And it's a fun one. Yes.
Mhm.
And again, another tool in our toolbox to help with where we're at.
Exactly.
We hope you got something out of this, everyone. And again, we will leave the name of that book and the author in the description. And if you have anything to add, we'd love to hear it. And otherwise, we'll see you at another time.
See you soon.